everyone, I'm Holly with Stella Quilts, and today we continue our series on 50 blocks for 50 states using the patterns from this book. The information for this book is in the description below, along with a link for the adaptations and the full instruction patterns that we have available. Today's block we're working on is for the state of Florida, so let's get started. The Florida block is made as a hexagon, so for that we're going to need 6 of our medium fabrics. These are 3-inch tall 60-degree triangles. Then we're going to need 1.5-inch strips cut into our diamonds out of our dark, and then we're going to need some of these border strips that are 5 inches with 60-degree angles cut on the side. And so those are the pieces. Let's get started. Just to demonstrate how to cut some of these pieces, I'm going to just use a scrap strip that I have just to show how this is done. We're going to use our 60-degree angle triangle ruler, and with the most 60-degree triangle rulers, I'm going to kind of put this over my fabric so you can see it better. There's a notch at the top, this flat spot here. That flat spot goes to the edge of the fabric, and it creates a spot to make it easier when lining things up. So to demonstrate, if I'm trying to line up my diamond with a piece of the border and I line it, we want it to be a straight line when it's completed. So if I line it up, that notch makes a nice straight edge with the sides that I'm lining up, which helps to make sure we get our 1/4-inch seam, and once it's sewn and pressed back, that we have a nice straight line. You don't have to have the notch, but it is extremely helpful. So to get these cut out of the strip, you'd cut your 3-inch strip for the center, and then you would just line up your 60-degree ruler with the line on the bottom of the strip and the flat part at the top, and then you just cut across and then down. For the diamonds, you're going to cut your strip, you'll cut one side, and then measure in from the angled cut the 1.5 inches. To get a diamond, you're always going to cut in from the angle this way, the same distance as the height of the strip. And that will then give, I put that on the right line. If I was to cut this, that then gives you your nice diamond, just like this one. For the border pieces, you want 5 inches across the bottom. One way to do that is to simply cut 5-inch strips all the way across. Let me just line this up. And then come back with your 60-degree triangle ruler and cut the angle on both sides so that the angles are pointing towards each other. Another way to do that, to maximize your fabric, is to start with your angle cut, then measure 5 inches. 1, 2, 3, 5. So this line right here is my 5-inch line. Put your ruler down so that you have your 60 degrees and cut. And then you measure 5 inches from this point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is in my line on my mat here. Flip my ruler. And then cut. And that does maximize how much you can get from each strip. It saves you just a hair a bit of fabric for each section, but that can make a difference on your yardage usage. If you are running a little shy, that can help maximize. So now that we've kind of gone over how to cut these pieces, let's go ahead and get started. First, I'm going to prepare my border fabrics. I'm going to separate 6 of them. And these I'm going to put with my center triangles. Then I'm going to take the remaining 12. 6 of them I'm going to attach a diamond on one end only. And then 6 of them I'm going to attach a diamond on both ends. Scoot that up so you can see. So that we have a set with a diamond, a border, and a diamond. We have a set that's a diamond and a border, and then we have our set that's our center and the border. I'm going to go ahead and sew all of these sections. When I'm sewing them together, I'm just going to fold it over, and like we showed earlier, I'm just going to line up by notching the ends. I can just have my 1/4 inch seam marked right there. If you don't notch the ends and have a point sticking out there, all you have to do is make sure your point is hanging off a 1/4 inch, and where the V intersects, that at the point of the V, that's your 1/4 inch seam, and sew across. So I'm going to go ahead and prepare all of these pieces and then be right back. Now that we have all the individual elements completed, we've got our center triangle with a border, we've got a border with 1 diamond and a border with 2 diamonds. We're going to go ahead and start assembling all of this. The first thing is going to be to sew the single diamond border to the center. And having the notches really does help with lining things up. So you can see as I line it up here, my notch lines up with the edge of the diamond there. The edge of my border here lines up with the notch of my triangle. The only other spot I'm going to check is to make sure that my points are going to line up here. So this is a little tricky because there's no nesting at this point. So what I like to do is I like to measure down a 1/4 inch, and then I'll put a pin through where the seam is, and then I'll continue to put the pin through the back fabric. So now that I have a pin, I'll show you that. So I have my 1/4 inch is right here. So I put my pin right through the seam, and it happens to be lined up, but a little too high. Okay, so there's my 1/4 inch there. So now those 2 points are aligned. I'm going to straighten up the side here. And I'm just going to do that so that when I come through and I sew, my goal is going to be to cross right at that line so that my points line up. So I'm going to go ahead and sew these 6. Now I'm going to sew the remaining side on. Again, trying to match those points as best as you possibly can. Line them up, pin if you need to keep them straight, and then sew across. Now we have all of our triangles, and we're going to go ahead and lay out the block. So this is a hexagon shape. And that's what it looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this row together, and then I'll sew both of the rows together. I'm going to also keep my try to keep my points. Being careful where these intersections meet. Now I did press my seams open in some places, but not all. So nesting the seams can be really helpful right here to get those points. But there is a lot of bulk coming together, so that's why I press some of my seams open. I'm going to go ahead and get this all sewn together. And this is what the Florida block looks like. As a hexagon, you would then put it into full quilts. You can either arrange that by connecting them with Y seams or putting them together as half hexes and then sewing half hexie strips together to make up the whole quilt. Because we're doing this as a series to eventually put all 50 states into one quilt, we're now going to turn this into a square block. To turn this into a square, we're actually going to then add a few triangles. So I'm going to add a triangle to each one of these rows. I'm just going to take this to the sewing machine, add these. We'll trim them down so that we have a 1/4 inch seam on either side. And then we're going to add a sashing strip down to the bottom so that it ends up being a square. The block by itself is not square. It actually measures about 11¼ by 13. So we're going to add the triangles, press them back, and then we'll trim them off and add sashing. Now I'm going to go ahead and trim off the extra fabric on the sides here. I'm going to make it so that this is nice and straight. I am checking to make sure that my point right here is at least 1/4 inch in so that I have space for a good seam allowance. Making sure I'm straight across the top, straight across the bottom. And then I'll flip it around and do the same thing. Another point of reference is the seam line can line up with one of the lines on the ruler as well. All right, so this is now 13 inches wide this way, and it is 11 inches tall this way. So we're going to add a strip on the top and then another strip on the bottom so that it will end up measuring 13 by 13 and will then fit into a quilt with other square blocks. Thank you for joining me today to do our Florida block. A couple quick tips on this block. It is very precise in the piecing, so I recommend making at least one triangle out of some scrap fabric before you make the entire block, just to check your seam allowance. If your seam allowance is more 5/16 of an inch versus 1/4 of an inch, that can affect how well the border pieces here fit around the triangle. So you may need to shorten them to 4 7/8 instead of 5 inches. Or if your seam allowance is a little shy of 1/4 inch, you should be okay still, but running a test with some scrap would be helpful just to make sure for you how that works out. I know I had to do a couple tests before I did this one for you today. So I hope this is all helpful. I hope you're enjoying our series, traveling through all of our 50 states and doing our quilt blocks for each one. That's all for today. Have a great day and happy quilting.